The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to our webinar on International Women's Day presented by WP student Rebecca Stegmann. My name is Sharon Ryan, and I'm in the Alumni Office here at William Patterson. Before I introduce our presenter, I want to go over how the webinar will work. You should be able to see the presentation on your computer screen right now, and you should also be able to hear the presentation through your computer's audio system. Please feel free to ask questions by typing them in. You see it on your dashboard. We will monitor any questions you have and answer them as we go on, or we can answer them at the end. Any questions that are not answered in today's webinar will be addressed after the webinar is completed, and all attendees will receive the questions, answers, and also a link to our YouTube channel where we'll be posting this webinar. So now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Rebecca Stegmann is the graduate assistant in the Women's Center at William Patterson. She holds a BA in psychology and English from West Virginia University, where she also minored in women's and gender studies. She is currently pursuing her master's degree in clinical and counseling psychology from William Patterson. After graduating, Rebecca plans to become a licensed counselor and work with women who have experienced trauma from sexual assault and intimate partner violence. In her spare time, Rebecca enjoys writing poetry, meditating, and participating in community-based activism. In today's webinar, Rebecca will cover the history of International Women's Day and introduce some of the films that will be shown at William Patterson's International Women's Day Film Festival on March 7th here on campus. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Stegmann, presenting International Women's Day, a history of the day, and an introduction to the film festival on March 7th. Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And of course, thank you, Sharon, for that introduction. As Sharon said, I'm going to be talking about the Women's Center's upcoming International Women's Day Film Festival, which will be held on March 7th, 2019 on WPU's campus in our Ballroom A. Let's see, how do we scroll through here? Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to start off first by talking about International Women's Day itself. You might be asking yourself, what is International Women's Day? Well, according to the UN, International Women's Day is a day when women are recognized for their achievements without regard to divisions, whether national, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, economic, or political. It's a day for celebrating the accomplishments of women in spite of the barriers we have faced, as well as for protesting against and working to fix the barriers that continue to hold women back. And as you can see from the images here, International Women's Day really is for all women. A recent push in the feminist movement has been for intersectionality, which is the recognition of how all of our various identities influence the ways in which we experience the world. International Women's Day is a day for learning about other women's racial identities, sexual orientations, religious identities, disabilities, ethnic identities, languages, gender expressions, socioeconomic statuses, and more. So where did International Women's Day come from? The first National Women's Day actually dates back to February 28, 1909. It was held in the United States, and it was organized to honor the women who led and participated in the 1908 garment workers' strike, which protested poor working conditions. International Women's Day was first held a few years later, on March 19, 1911, and it was first observed in Austria, Denmark, and Sweden as a day to protest for women's rights. The day saw over 1 million people come together to demonstrate for women's suffrage, women's right to hold office, and an end to job discrimination. Over the next few years, International Women's Day spread across Europe and into countries like Russia as people used the day to protest World War I. The annual observations were actually really successful at getting women's voices heard. For example, in 1917, Russian women's observance of International Women's Day actually sparked a revolution against the socialist Russian government. And 4 days after that initial protest, the Tsar had abdicated and women were granted the right to vote. So as you can see, International Women's Day has really been influential in women's history. Between 1917 and 1975, International Women's Day continued to spread across the globe, although it was celebrated on different days depending on the country and the year. But momentum built, and International Women's Days are cited as being important days of protest and celebration. A full history of the women's and feminist movements across the world during these 50 some odd years It's a little out of the scope of this presentation, but you can imagine how American women utilized International Women's Day during the Civil Rights Movement, to protest the Vietnam War, to organize our own gay rights, and so on and so forth. Then 1975 was a big year because it was declared International Women's Year by the United Nations. And this marked the first year in which International Women's Day was celebrated on March 8th worldwide. 20 years later, in 1995, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was developed, and this was a historic moment in which 189 governments came together to envision a world where each woman and girl can exercise her choices, such as participating in politics, getting an education, having an income, and living in societies free from violence and discrimination. This declaration led to a focus on women's rights in international and domestic policies. Then another 20 years later or so, by 2014, International Women's Day was an official holiday in over 100 countries. And that brings us to recent years. Every year, the United Nations chooses a theme for International Women's Day, and lately they have been focusing on total gender equality worldwide by 2030. And you can see some of those recent themes here. We have Planet 50-50 by 2030, Women in the Changing World of Work, Time is Now, and then this year's theme is Think Equal, Build Smart, Innovate for Change. And the organizers are using the hashtag Balance for Better to spread the word and raise awareness. So these are some images of how International Women's Day is being celebrated around the world in the 21st century. In the top left photo, you can see there's a young girl at a march in Russia. It has become very, very common to involve children in International Women's Day activism. And you can also see this in the bottom left photo, which has school children in Uganda demonstrating. Other countries march as well. You can see the construction workers from Egypt in the top center photo. And then there are Mexican women protesting femicide in the bottom right photo. Still, other countries hold presentations, such as the photo from Iraq in the bottom row, second from right. Iraq has also been known to have women-sponsored marathons through some of their cities to celebrate International Women's Day, which is pretty creative and fun. And then finally, some other countries hold conferences, such as China in that top right photo and France on the bottom row, second from left. So you can see that the International Women's Day celebrations and protests really vary from country to country, usually depending on the pressing issues that the country is facing at the time. And that brings us to the films we will be showing. They're all films created by women that highlight important aspects of international violence against women. And that's kind of the theme we've been going with this year, is exposing international violence against women. So we will be showing Mrs. Gundo's Daughter, The Greatest Silence, Mass Rape in the Congo, The Price of Sex, and Senorita Extraviada, Missing Young Woman. Before I discuss the films in more depth, I want to briefly talk about international violence against women. The United Nations defines violence against women and girls as any act of gender-based violence that results in, or is likely to result in, physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. So that's a pretty wordy definition, but it includes acts of violence such as intimate partner violence, sexual violence and harassment, human trafficking, child marriages, and female genital mutilation. The UN also addresses the intersectional aspect of violence against women and girls, stating that while gender-based violence can happen to anyone, anywhere, some women and girls are particularly vulnerable. For instance, young girls and older women, women who identify as lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or intersex, migrants and refugees, indigenous women and ethnic minorities, or women and girls living with HIV and disabilities, and those living through humanitarian crises. And I believe that the films we have chosen for our festival kind of give us a tiny glimpse into this intersectional piece of gendered violence. So, our festival will start on March 7th at 10 a.m. with a screening of Mrs. Gundo's Daughter. This film follows Mrs. Gundo, a Mali native, as she seeks political asylum in the United States. Mrs. Gundo knows that if she is sent back to Mali, her daughter will be forced to undergo female genital mutilation, or FGM. The World Health Organization defines FGM as all procedures that involve partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. FGM is practiced because it is believed to maintain a girl's sexual purity, meaning that she will be a virgin until marriage, and reducing the likelihood that she will cheat on her husband. Unfortunately, sexual purity in itself is a myth. In actuality, FGM is a method of restricting girls' sexual autonomy and freedom. It is considered torture and a human rights violation due to the purpose for which it is performed, i.e., that sexual purity myth, and the health complications with which it is associated. These health risks include severe pain during urination, menstruation, sex and childbirth, infections due to unclean surgical instruments, excessive bleeding, UTIs, and more. Despite being outlawed in many countries, over 200 million girls and women alive today have undergone the procedure. And this is mainly due to that sexual purity myth, meaning that girls who are not cut are unlikely to ever be married and may even be exiled or killed. Mrs. Gundo in this film is a survivor of FGM herself, and she knows that remaining in the United States as a refugee is her only hope of protecting her daughter from this violent cultural practice. And we have chosen this film as one of the ones we are showing because there are so many misconceptions around FGM, and we want to really educate our viewers on its realities. And we also want to show viewers the complicated and drawn-out process of seeking political asylum in the United States, especially considering how recently we had the caravan arrive at our southern border seeking political asylum. At 11:15 a.m., we will start.
Oh, Rebecca, hi. This is Sharon in
Yeah.
the alumni office. I just wanted to interrupt for 2 seconds because more people have come on. So I just
Great.
wanted to say this is Rebecca Stegmann doing the presentation. She did start with kind of a history of International Women's Day. So if you do have any questions about that, you can type them in. And now she's just going over the film festival, which will be taking place next Thursday. And these are the films. So I just wanted to give a little background for people who've been signing in a little later. Okay, so
Great.
sorry, Rebecca,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
No problem. So at 11:15 a.m. on March 7th, we will be showing The Greatest Silence, Mass Rape in the Congo. This film was shot in the war zones of the Democratic Republic of Congo during its bloody civil conflict. This 20-year conflict has resulted in the systematic kidnapping, rape, mutilation, and torture of tens of thousands of women and girls by both foreign militias and the Congolese army. In short, mass rape has been used as a weapon of war in the DRC for 20 years, despite being considered a war crime. Furthermore, this film offers interviews with both the women who have survived these war crimes and the soldiers who have perpetrated them. So we decided to show this film because, first and foremost, it is in an area of the world that Americans often don't hear about, despite the fact that Congolese women have been suffering from these war crimes for over 2 decades. Moreover, a Congolese gynecologist named Denis Mukwege recently won the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize for his work to end sexual violence as a weapon of war and armed conflict. He actually won that prize alongside human rights advocate Nadia Murad, and they are sharing the award this year, or last year. But Dr. Mukwege actually founded a hospital in the DRC that specializes in treating the Congolese women who have been abused. So we think this is a very timely issue considering the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded regarding this issue last year. This brings us to our next film, which we will start showing at 12:45 p.m. on March 7th, called The Price of Sex. This film follows several young Eastern European women who have been trafficked into sexual slavery outside of their native countries. If they are able to escape slavery, they are promptly deported with no money and usually without their identifying documents. Years of sexual and physical violence, intimidation, and coercion were intended to force these women into silence, but this film has allowed them to tell their stories while informing others of the dynamics of sex trafficking, pimps, and forced prostitution. The director of this film, Mimi Chakarova, actually disguises herself as a prostitute in order to capture some of these moments, which include interviews with survivors, traffickers, clients, and activists. So it really offers a very comprehensive view of sex trafficking in Eastern Europe. We feel that this film is important because Americans largely have a sense that slavery no longer exists, but unfortunately this film proves that the sexual slave trade is alive and well. Furthermore, Americans have a very large misconception about what sex trafficking looks like. They think it's kind of like in that Liam Neeson film Taken, where a woman is just abducted by people that she doesn't know. In actuality, girls are often trafficked by someone that they know and trust, and they trust these people so much that they often leave their native countries willingly and then are tricked into sexual slavery once they're outside of their home countries. Following The Price of Sex, there will be an hour-long panel discussion beginning at 2:15 p.m. about the film's and international violence against women. Our panelists this year include Dr. Scala, Dr. Sabogal, and Dr. Kala Ramadan from the Women's and Gender Studies Department, and Dr. Raghavan from the Psychology Department. So we really encourage audience members to ask any questions that they have so we can start an interesting and engaging discussion around these films and the topics that they touch on. After the panel, we will begin the screening of our final film, Senorita Extraviada, Missing Young Woman, at 3:45 p.m. This film exposes the oft-ignored femicide in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. In the past 25 years, over 350 young women have been kidnapped, raped, and murdered in the city of the future. Many of these women had frequently crossed the US-Mexico border in search of work, so Senorita Extraviada considers how globalization and the global economy contributed to the vulnerability of these women. The vast majority of these sex murders were never solved, although they're presumed to have occurred at the hands of local gangs, and moreover, they were completely ignored by the Mexican government, even though young women continue to go missing today. We feel that this film is important because the lack of media coverage of these violent deaths, despite occurring so close to our own country. It also addresses issues around the current rhetoric surrounding Mexican immigrants and border crossers. We feel that the rhetoric doesn't address how vulnerable these individuals, and especially these women, are to violence and harassment. So before I put up the festival flyer and open it up for questions, I just want to thank our co-sponsors and our other organizers. The Department for Women's and Gender Studies and the Office of International Students and Scholars have supported our festival tremendously. Of course, thank you to Alumni Relations for organizing this webinar and supporting this event. And then I would also like to thank Durga Tree International, an organization that works to prevent global human exploitation. They will have a representative at our festival, and so if you're interested in what they do and if you want to get involved, you can talk to Jess. She's going to be their representative there. Some other things to look forward to during the festival are, of course, cold lunch served at noon. After every screening, we are going to have free book raffles, so 2 films following each screening. And during the panel, we are going to display select posters from the art installation, Women's Rights Are Human Rights, international posters on gender-based inequality, violence, and discrimination. Those will be displayed on the screen during the panel, so you'll be able to look through those as we have our discussion. So you can see the full schedule here, and I am more than happy to answer any questions you might have about International Women's Day, the history, the films we are showing, international violence, anything you might want to know.
So if you have any questions now, this is the time you can type them in on your dashboard. Rebecca's, I'm sure, has all the answers, knows much about this film festival and about all the films. So we'll give it just a few minutes. And
Sure.
yeah, and I just wanted to say that we will also be there to meet people, meet students, and meet alumni. So if we like being involved with the other organizations here on campus. So, and thank you guys for coming to this webinar that Rebecca put together. So
Yes.
we hope we'll see you at the film festival as well. So I'm just
Definitely, yes. March 7th, starting at 10 a.m.
And it's an all-day film festival. So if you can't make all of them, you can come to one, or
Oh, definitely. Yep. We'll be there all day from 10 to 5.
Okay, I don't see anyone typing any questions. So I think that we will say, if you do have any questions, what will happen at the end of this webinar, you're going to get a little survey. And if there was something that you wanted to ask, but maybe you didn't feel comfortable or you just didn't have time, you can type the question in there, and we will forward this over to Rebecca. So I think that we will say thank you, Rebecca, for doing this. We hope that we'll see you at the at the film festival next Thursday. And Rebecca, thank you for presenting this. And thank you
Yes.
all for attending. And we will see you at our next webinar. And Rebecca, we will see you next week.
Sounds good. See you then. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.